We are joined right now by the new federal immigration minister. He's also Minister of Refugees and Citizenship here in Canada, Mark Miller. Mr. Miller, Minister Miller, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me on, Aaron.
We haven't spoken in a long time. This is now you in a new job, in a new capacity within this government. But immigration is a subject that's gotten a lot of headlines in the last little while. And most recently, and it's something we talked about on the show, this idea that we're looking at international students, so many of whom come to this country, and deciding that, okay, maybe it's time to consider putting a cap on the number that are coming here, even though the government doesn't want to change its overall immigration numbers for people coming into Canada. So where are you on this subject?
Yeah, and first off, it is an exceedingly important subject because of the what these international students bring to the country. First, they're a huge financial asset, between 20 and 30 billion to the country. So it's not something you can just in one sort of fell swoop turn off the taps, because it has impacts on the institutions that drive the economy of Montreal, for example, but across the country. But obviously, we've seen increases year over year in the last few years that are alarming. First and foremost, because you want to make sure that these people can get a proper education and they're actually here for the purpose that they get the visa for. And often, what we've seen is that on the margins there are there's an ecosystem that's been created that has perverse incentives, but there's also fraud. And so my job as an immigration minister is trying to figure out what I've got to solve for. I'm not the police of underfunding by provinces of post-secondary education, but I do have to worry about the integrity of the system, and that means I'm going to have to work with a number of provinces, some that are doing a good job, some not so great, to make sure that we rein this in to some extent, and make sure that we are actually rewarding good actors and punishing the bad actors. And there are bad actors. What I don't want to do is do something that's unintelligent and actually creates more of a problem than it solves. And while the idea of a cap is interesting, just because in how simple it is, this is going to be a complex thing to solve, and it's going to have to be done in phases with various levels of implication of provinces and institutions.
Well, with all due respect, it sounds to me a little bit like we're scapegoating foreign students here, because this idea, well, they're not all coming here to get their education and some of them are doing nefarious things, that's really never been raised before. But suddenly, with the whole immigration issue now being raised in terms of how many immigrants we're letting into this country, now it seems these students are going to bear the brunt of whatever ramifications come. Do you kind of buy into that? Because that's what it sounds like to me.
No, not at all. And in fact, it's important to be clear here. I don't want to be demonizing international students. They are a huge asset, an intellectual asset, and in some senses will be the future of this country. A lot of them choose to leave, and they're soft ambassadors of Canada and really make us shine internationally, which is really, really important. But unfortunately, in some areas, they've been given false hope by some bad actors in the country, institutions that have said, you can come here to this country and get this type of business education, and they end up driving Ubers for $100,000 in student charges over the course of their education. That's not what we're trying to do as a country. We're really trying to leverage some incredible assets that we have to compete with other countries to bring into Canada. So the last thing I want to leave the impression is that we're scapegoating these students who are some really bright minds.
Okay.
But unfortunately, because of the lucrative nature of this, there have been some bad actors in the system that we need to kind of weed out, and those institutions need some sort of reckoning. And that requires not only my involvement, but those of provinces and the actual institutions that are promising or making false hope for people abroad that they can come to Canada, stay here, maybe become permanent residents. And that, you don't want that, because it does tarnish the reputation of the good actors.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to ask you one thing, and then we want to get to the idea of citizenship oaths and stuff. But this question now, the government's agenda with respect to how many people are going to bring into this country by over the next 5 years, big numbers, 500,000 people. And I guess some people are wondering, because the argument's been made, you've heard it, we're in the middle of a housing shortage in this country. We keep bringing in more people. What's the point? They have nowhere to live. They're taking space away from other people who still can't find homes. How do you square that circle?
Yeah, look, I'm not going to ignore the volume, and clearly I look at the reports that are issued by the various banks as to what the impact of this volume is. But clearly we often make the mistake that we only look at the demand side of immigration, i.e. they're demanding houses, and not the supply side. We need people with skilled labor to actually build those houses. The Ontario government has said as much. I often cite the mayor of Halifax, who says that the current face of Halifax today wouldn't be so without Lebanese migration entrepreneurship that has built a lot of the modern face of Halifax. So we often disregard the supply side of things. clearly, it's something I think we can do. But when people say, let's reduce immigration, I ask them, what exactly? Do we want to reduce those economic migrants that are almost solely responsible for the increase in our gross domestic product? If you look at the entrance into the workforce over the last year or so, over 90% is due to immigration. Do we close our hearts and harden our hearts to those who are seeking refuge in Canada, fleeing from war and oppression? I think the answer is no. So that number is significant. It's something that I think we need to face as a country and have a conversation as, and even adjust within those categories. But I think it's something we can do, and we can actually face this challenge of building houses and getting roofs over people's head. When I got into politics, Aaron, in 2015, the interest rate on debt was pretty free, but there was a housing challenge in Montreal for, some of the most challenging communities in homelessness, and that's something I continue to fight for as an MP and as the Minister of Immigration. But it's not something that came out yesterday. It's the result of successive governments underinvesting, both federally and provincially, in housing over the last 30 years. So I'd be loath to blame immigrants or the larger volumes these days for a problem that has many faces to it.
Okay.
All right, let's talk about the oath of citizenship happening with just a click of a button. This was potentially supposed to be happening as of June. Where are we on that plan, and does it look like it's a reality?
That option's still on the table. Canadians have asked us to speed things up, and I know the lag in all the processing times, the federal government, including Citizenship, has been heavily criticized, and rightly so. I largely lead a department that hasn't really adapted to the 21st century, and the preference at all times is to make sure that we're doing this in person. I would encourage anyone who has the opportunity to go to a citizenship ceremony. It renews your faith in Canada. The preferred option is to do it in person, to swear the oath, and to recognize the seriousness of the moment. But options like Zoom and doing it on the internet is not something that I'm ready to exclude, because there are rural, remote regions where we ask people to move and drive perhaps hundreds of kilometers to go to a citizenship ceremony, where they could do this in all the same seriousness on the internet. I think that's important. There was a news story the other day about Chief Roos, who was fighting the wildfires, who did it on Zoom in what looked like his fire truck. That's really cool, and he became a Canadian citizen. So that, I don't want to exclude those options, but again, the decision isn't taken on sort of what has been called sort of the one-click option. But I do concede that it has not been unanimous in the review of it, and there has been some legitimate criticisms of people perhaps taking it for granted, and that I do. That I do take seriously.
I mean, certainly, Minister Miller, the idea of being able to save people up to 3 months of processing time, that's got to be a huge advantage, a huge incentive. I'd like to ask you about Roxham Road, back in the news again lately, with the dismantling of that and the fact that people are still coming in, but they're finding different routes, and more than ever, people are flying in. So it actually kind of puts people, if they're in a financial position, they can still come across and get in, and those who are not are perhaps being put more in harm's way. Could I ask you to comment on the latest situation with Roxham Road?
Yeah, and the closing of Roxham Road was more of a closing of statistics and wasn't getting rid of the problems. We don't encourage anyone to migrate irregularly to Canada, but obviously we recognize there's wars and famines across the world, and the world hit an ominous number of 100 million people that are displaced across the planet last year, and it's not something that's going away. I think we've all seen scenes of in Italy of mass irregular migration, the impact that has on communities. Canada isn't immune to that. We're geographically lucky and blessed to have a huge country that has an ocean on each side, block ice in the north, and a nuclear superpower to the south. But we do see migration, and we have to do it in a way that Canadians expect us to deal with these issues when we are faced with them, which is in a humane and humanitarian fashion. So that involves planning, involves making sure there's a roof over people's head, and dealing with this in a way that we faced any challenge as a country currently. And I don't want to hide that from anyone. We will see some of the largest numbers this year of asylum seekers, but I think we can process this in a way that is both humane and humanitarian. But the federal government can't do this alone. And it's funny, we just talked about international students, and when I talk about that, provinces say this is their exclusive jurisdiction, because it's big money. And when we talk about asylum seekers and refugees. They say it's entirely the federal government's responsibility.
Exactly.
What's the difference between the two? One has money, the other doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So we all have responsibility in this, and I think it's something that can be done in a better fashion than we've done up to date.
Minister, before we let you go, we would be remiss if we didn't ask you what you thought about the announcement earlier this afternoon of the House Speaker, Anthony Rota, stepping down.
Well, look, particularly in the wake of the high holidays, this was a disgraceful event, an embarrassing moment in our history, and I think Anthony did the right thing in recognizing his responsibility and in stepping down. I've known Anthony for years. He's fundamentally an honorable and a decent person. Is unfortunately going to be defined by 3 or 4 days in his life. I wish him well, but he did the honorable thing at the end of the day and stepped down, and it is the right decision. And we'll have the opportunity in the next 3 or 4 days to elect a new speaker, because the business of Parliament does have to go on.
Federal Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, Mark Miller. Minister Miller, thank you so much. Appreciate your time today as always.
Thank you.
Thank you both.